Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for showing up tonight. Thank you for putting this on your calendar for Sunday as opposed to, we had, I think on Wednesday in the middle of the week, we had to reschedule. So thank you for being flexible. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of R2C College and the Paying for College 101 group. And I am here tonight with Terry Cowdrey. And I'll let Terry explain a little bit about her background, but just as a quick reference, Terry was vice president and the dean of admissions and financial aid at several colleges, and the two recent ones were Colby College, and before that, St. Lawrence University. And in addition, since leaving that role, Terry plays a lot of interim. She is still a dean, but in an interim capacity at a whole host of schools, and really helps schools with doing consulting in their admissions and enrollment management practices. So we've been doing several sessions with Terry since the spring. I've personally really enjoyed them. We get a lot of excellent feedback from people because Terry is so kind of calm, but with a solid information about how this process works. So I know that you'll get a lot of good information from her tonight. And this is actually also personally one of my favorite sessions, just because I like data, and this is pretty data heavy. But it's also kind of just a little fun to analyze what's happening in admissions, and kind of what can you take away as a parent from kind of what's happened, what's just happened, or what trends we're kind of starting to see, and how can you use that as you're beginning the process with your son or daughter, in the college search or college visit, and planning process. So, I think hopefully you'll get a lot out of tonight. So we've got a lot of interesting slides. Terry's going to go through them. I'm going to answer questions. I might be like pop in some questions for Terry as we go along. And then after, we will try and answer as many people's questions as possible. So thank you, Terry. If you want to add anything more to your experience in the field.
Sure. Thanks so much, Debbie. And one of the things I will say, having been in the enrollment world for now about 40 years, is that I always appreciate when people are trying to plan ahead and get information so that they can make decisions from with an informed perspective. And so I appreciate all of you who are here tonight. It's one of the things I enjoyed doing most when I was campus-based, was giving talks to parents and students about this process. There was a quick question, and again, encourage you to put questions in the chat. But I believe I'll confirm with Debbie that there will be a recording of this session.
Yes, this is recorded, and we'll send it out tomorrow, because there will be a lot of information. So you might want to kind of go back and relook at it.
Exactly. And you don't need to worry about trying to take notes as we're talking about things tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started.
Yeah, and while Terry does that, I just put it in the chat too. It's just, again, helpful to know who is here, like what year in high school your student is, and it doesn't really matter, but it's just nice to know. And hopefully, as I'm seeing, the earlier that you're here, the better for your own knowledge and kind of helping your students. Great.
Well, one of the things that is certainly true is that each year's results do have an effect on the next year. As you might imagine, most colleges, though not all of them, most residential colleges have a certain target enrollment that they're trying to have, a total enrollment. And so if they have a year where they have a particularly large first year class one year, they might in fact have a slightly smaller one the next year, or the reverse of that. But definitely there are things that happen each year that affect the next year or two. So we're going to talk tonight about some data from the Common Application. I hope most of you are familiar with what that organization is, but it's a single form that many colleges will take. And so the Common Application provides reports from the data that they have. We'll talk specifically about the early admissions results, early action and early decision as we go forward, and what things you might, those of you with students in grade 11, be thinking about for next year. And certainly it will also be relevant for those of you with students in grades 9 and 10. So you may have heard or read in the popular press about an anticipated decline in high school graduates. And that, of course, is able to be projected really pretty much every 18 years based on birth rate, and certainly every for 12 years based on kindergarten enrollment. And so the total number of high school graduates in the United States is expected to peak this year and then decline for the next 15 or so years. The important thing, though, I feel, is that often it's talked about as an enrollment cliff. And if you look at the line on the graph, there's really not a cliff depicted. It's a downturn. It's a decline for sure, but I think it would be unwise to think that competition for admission at the highly selective colleges is going to get any easier over this time. Yes, there is a decline, and I think that some of the colleges, those that are already experiencing a challenge in hitting their enrollment targets, may in fact be doing some innovative things in the coming years, adding additional academic programs, adding sports or activities, perhaps increasing their scholarships, because there are going to be, in the US, fewer high school graduates to enroll at our colleges. Common Application, as I said, provides data each month, actually, through the academic year. And so these are statistics through December 1st. Remember, this year is the peak year for high school graduates, but it's interesting to me to note that 5% more students, this is individual students, applied to the member colleges. And whenever they do these kinds of data comparisons, they do only use for their analysis the colleges that were Common App members last year and are Common App members again this year. So they're doing an apples to apples comparison. But if you look at the last 5 years, you can also see that there's been growth in the number of students who are applying through the Common Application to colleges. You can also see that there are more applications being submitted. Okay, so there's a difference. The first graph was about the number of students, individual students. This is about the number of applications. So 8% more applications have been submitted as of December 1st. Now, many colleges don't have actual regular decision deadlines until January or February. But you can see that not only are the numbers increasing of applications being submitted, but many of them are being submitted before the 1st of December. So people often ask about what's the right number of applications for a student to submit, and it's as individual as the students are. You can see here that the increase in applications per applicant has been gradual but steady. But I think one of the important things is this is really fascinating to look at if you look at students who at different regions of the US. In some regions, the average might be more like 10 per student. It's also important to know that for students who apply early decision, for some of those students, they're only applying to one school. And if admitted, they're not applying to additional schools. But this is important to note that there is an increase in the number of applications per student submitted.
And Terry, can I just say something, maybe like going back to like a slide or two before, like the number of either increase in applicants or number of applications. You know, it'd be kind of interesting to see, even though you talked about the kind of decline, like next year, is this number gonna dip, you know, from where it is this year, or it actually has the potential of increasing? Because just because we're talking about the number of high school students or who graduate, or the number of students who graduate high school, it doesn't mean that every single one of them goes on to apply to college. So there's definitely populations that, just haven't applied to college. So I just want to bring up that just because we talk about this decline, these numbers may continue to increase, or because there's more people or different pockets of population of students who didn't apply before, who might start to come back into the applicant base.
I think that's a really important point, Debbie, for a couple of reasons. One, there are lots of different initiatives across the country. Some are state-based, some are through community organizations, working to, in fact, increase the college going rate of those senior classes. And so that is something that could result in more applicants. In addition, with the Common Application statistics, this includes not only US students, where we're seeing that decline in high school graduates, but this also includes international students. And so for many colleges, they will continue to see students from outside of the US competing for spaces in their classes. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the deadline decision type. And again, this is language that some of you are probably very familiar with. Others, if you're just starting this process with a 9th grader, you may be still learning these different titles. But just to remind folks, early decision, students are allowed to apply only to one college at a time if they're applying early decision. There are some colleges that have early decision 1 and early decision 2, but you can only apply to one college early decision 1. If you're admitted, then you have made a commitment to enroll. Early action, which you can see that steep increase in the turquoise line at the top, early action is just an opportunity for a student to apply early, but they make no commitment to enroll. In many ways, early action is a little bit like rolling admission, the orange line used to be, where students would apply throughout the year, they'd be notified throughout the year, but they'd have until May to make their enrollment choice. And you can see that students, the early action is growing a lot, rolling is fairly steady, but it's regular decision, in fact, that has declined a little bit. Because so many students are saying, if I can learn now, if I could apply and learn now what my decision is, why would I wait? Now, some of the students who wait are students who are perhaps getting into the whole college search process a little bit later. And so they are applying regular decision to schools that they may have discovered a little bit later during their senior year. It's no problem to be a regular decision candidate. But again, I think with early action, there's that sense of if you can know earlier the outcome you want to. And as we say in the bullet, early is the new regular.
And to be fair, and I don't have this information on the slide, over the past few years, more colleges have offered early action.
Absolutely.
So that has made it possible for students to apply early.
I think one of the challenging things there is that some of the colleges moved to offering early action in part to spread out the application review process over more months. It is still challenging at the colleges that receive the greatest number of applications for them to review those applications in a timely way to get those early decisions out to people, the early action notifications. And so some students will find that they'll apply early and they'll end up getting a deferral decision. In part, it may be a reflection of their own kind of where they stand in the school's applicant pool. But I think there are also colleges that are finding that just getting through all the early action applications in a fast way can be difficult. And so there are more students who are, more colleges that are deferring some of those early action students to regular decision.
So Terry, somebody had a good question, and we are in this space so much, we kind of like take our understanding for granted. So somebody said, if there's only one common application submitted, how can there be more applications than students applying? And so I think they just.
Sure. No, it's a great question. When a student fills out the common application form, the student indicates how many colleges they want that form to go to. And the colleges have the opportunity to also include some supplemental questions. So currently, I'm the interim VP for enrollment at Hendrix College, a small liberal arts college in Arkansas. That's one of the colleges that changed lives. At Hendrix, we use the common application, but we have some specific questions that we ask. And that's been true at all of the places that I've been an interim. It was true when I was campus-based at Colby, at St. Lawrence, and some other schools. So one student might say, send my application to 4 colleges. Another student might say, send my application to 14. And so that's how there can be this greater number of applications than there are of students.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of information about gender from Common App through December 1st. Female applicants are a larger proportion of the applicant pool than male applicants, but both have grown in pretty similar, at a pretty similar rate through the years. What would be interesting to look at, I think, is the end of year data, because I think there is at least some conventional wisdom that some of the young women get their applications in earlier than some of the young men do. But we've also had the case that at many colleges, there are more women seeking enrollment than there are men. And on residential campuses, particularly on the small campuses, there are times where there's really an interest in balancing gender on campus. And so that's something to be aware of.
Right. So this is where you could, if you have a son, you could use this information maybe a little bit more to your advantage. And there's something called a common data set, which colleges share a lot more detail about their enrollment and application. And so anyhow, at a different time, we might go into depth about that, but you can get more information on each college about how many male versus female students applied, and how many were accepted at the rate, and how many ultimately enrolled. And to Terry's point, some colleges are trying to improve that balance. So if you're a male and you apply, you might have a better chance because they might be accepting, at a higher rate males than females, and it's just, a supply and demand issue.
Right. So it's probably no surprise that highly selective schools have the largest increase in apps, because in fact, selective in this process, in the college process, is really another word for most popular, because it means that the schools are getting a much greater number of applications, almost always from very strong competitive students, than they're able to admit because of how many they are able to enroll. So the more popular a school is, the more selective they have to be in admission in order to make sure that they don't over-enroll and have more students than they have classroom seats for or housing for, etc. So you can see that the most selective schools, which is the blue line, the light blue line, increased by 25%. And this is through November 1st of this year. All of them increased, whether it's the most selective, and you can see the definitions on the graph. Most selective means that they admit fewer than 25% of the students who apply. Highly selective admit between 25 and 49% of the students who apply. More selective, they admit between 50 and 74%, and less selective, they admit over 75% of the students who apply. But as you can see, every single one of those categories has seen an increase in applications. And so I think that that's an important thing to understand, that it's, even though the growth is high at the most selective and highly selectives, 25% and 34%, it is there for all of them.
And one other thing I wanted to point out, which I struck me when I saw this, and again, I didn't add the extra data, and I don't know it precisely, I just know it anecdotally. But if you knew the number of actual schools that are considered most selective, I'm gonna throw it out. I mean, maybe it's like 30 to 40, in terms of number of schools, versus the number of schools that fit into that highly selective of 25 versus 49 is a much larger number of schools. So it's just kind of, this is kind of our society, obviously, students want to go to the most highly selective school, and that's where the competition is, even though there's a larger number of schools available at that, at that 25 to 49% range. So just something to consider, that just don't get students stuck on that dream school that's a real far reach, when there actually could be a lot of other very good schools in that 25 to 49 range, which you can see, I mean, they get applications, but not as much relative to the number of schools that there are.
Right. I think that it's a great point, and it fits very well with the notion of building a balanced list. It's also the case that students, if a student enrolls at a college where they're, sort of toward the top end of that class profile, they often are able to get a greater merit scholarship. Sometimes they can get opportunities to do research with faculty or other special kinds of programs. So part of the thinking and strategy around the college search process is finding the places that are going to give the student the most opportunities. And that's not for every student going to be those that are the hardest to be admitted to. So one of the other really interesting things to me are these data about public and private institutions. The line that's blue on the left graph showing the application trends on the public schools is pretty incredible when you think that in a span of 4 years, the applications to public institutions have increased by over 100%. Certainly, again, there are increases both in public and private, but there's also in the second graph, students applying to only private schools has decreased slightly. And I think that, lots and lots of students realize, and their parents realize, that quality is not about whether a school is public or private. There are fabulous public schools that will fit a student better than some of the private schools they might consider, and the reverse is true as well. So it is a descriptor, but it is not something that can be correlated in any close way with the quality of the experience the student's going to have.
But the other thing to kind of also take away from this is that there is more competition at the public universities these days. Mm-hmm. So particularly the flagship ones, and particularly maybe the flagship one in your state. So just, be aware of that. I mean, another reason why there is this more applications going to public is, quite honestly, and particularly if it's your state public, it's going to be a more reasonably priced school. So again, this is just, you're kind of just getting the sense of where the applications are flowing, so that you can either adjust your expectations or create that more balanced list when you are really putting together the colleges that your student's going to apply to.
I think one of the things to remember too about this, and this is particularly maybe for some of the parents on the call who went to college here in the US, is that many years ago, it was not uncommon for a public flagship to be really dominated by students from that state. And though certainly all of the public flagships still enroll many students in the home state, the expansion that those schools have made, and we've seen it a lot in recent years with public universities in the southern states to recruit students nationally. And so the number, for example, of Northeastern students who live in the Northeast who are choosing to go to public universities in Alabama, in South Carolina, in Florida, and then also in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota, has really increased. So one of the nice things is that it means that for students who do choose, whether it's their home state public or an out-of-state public, there will be a diversity of students, a geographic diversity as well as a diversity of life experience. Testing is always an interesting conversation, and is getting more interesting in some ways, in that we have this year seen more students submitting test scores. It has grown more than the students not submitting test scores. Only a few schools have changed their policy and gone back to what for many was a pre-pandemic policy of requiring test scores. But there's a lot of discussion in the admissions industry about whether, in fact, there will be more schools going back to requiring test scores as part of the admissions process. I will say personally, it is harder to discern differences among students when you have only their transcripts, because schools have such varying grading systems and high school curricula vary so greatly. I'm still a big fan of test optional, but it is something for you all to be aware of, particularly for those of you with younger students, that it's still going to be important for them to have test scores that they feel good about, in order to make sure they don't eliminate themselves as a candidate from a school that moves to requiring the test scores in the year that they're applying.
Right, and that's a little tricky now because, you know, you're a student with a junior. We don't know if, like, you know, a college will decide, unfortunately, you know, in the next few months or maybe even over the summer, that they're going to require tests for the coming year. I mean, hopefully they don't do it at the last minute, but you know, and again, if you're a family with a sophomore, we certainly don't know, you know, which ones are going to potentially change their requirements. So that's why, to Terry's point, and we recommend it. It's good to honestly have taken the test and have a score, and then decide whether or not you want to use it, than to not have any score and you might need it at some point.
So we talked a little bit about geography, and that first slide we were showing overall at high schools in the United States, or high school graduates in the United States, what the trend was through 2041. And this shows by region and state what the trends look like. And so what you can see here is that the number of high school graduates in the South it will in fact increase by 3%, based on again all of the states that are in green. The declines in the other three regions that are marked are pretty considerable: 17% down in the Northeast, 16% in the Midwest, and 20% in the West. And so again, one might think, okay, if I'm thinking about this and I want my son or daughter to think about some of the flagship publics out of state, if I live in the Northeast, maybe they should be looking at some of the flagship publics in the Midwest or in the Western states, where those states are going to experience a decline in their own graduates. You think about the University of Colorado Boulder, and Colorado is going to see a 12% decline. The important thing to notice, though, is this is not 2023 to 2026. This is 2023 to 2041. So it isn't as sharp a decline as you might think when you look at New York and a minus 27%. But these are real numbers based on knowing right now how many students we have enrolled in kindergarten and having a sense of the transient nature of our population, how people are moving into states, out of states, etc. International applications. So this year we've seen growth in international applications slow. Only a 5% growth this year compared to 17% last year. The international application number is influenced by a variety of things, certainly was very negatively influenced during the pandemic. It's also influenced by political situations and I expect, for example, unfortunately, what's going on in Southern California with the terrible wildfires might have an impact on international students applying to some of the schools in Southern California, at least right now. So there's a sense of kind of reacting to what's happening in the US. The other thing that influences international applications to colleges in the United States is how attractive universities around the world make their own opportunities. So there are, for example, in Asia, a number of countries that are opening liberal arts colleges where they did not have them before. And certainly in the UK, there are a number of things that have been done to make UK universities more appealing for international students. And it's something some of your sons and daughters may want to consider is, do they want to think about university outside of the US and as part of that balanced list that they're creating. So this is where we get into some real detail for the early decision or early action admit rates by individual colleges for the last 3 years. And what you can see is green is for their class of 2027. So that was students who enrolled in the fall of 23. Blue is for the class of 28. Red is for the class of 29. And so that's for students who will be enrolling next fall. And we don't have the data for this year for the students enrolling next fall for all of the schools. You'll see the red bar is missing for some of the schools. But we do have the data for the students who are current sophomores in college and those who are current first-year students in college. Debbie, is there anything particular you wanted to comment on related to these rates?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this to Terry earlier. This is kind of like what people are always looking for. Like, what were the exact rates? What was the admit rate for early decision this year? And two interesting things is, one is, we actually, the colleges are not being as generous with sharing their information early in the season as they used to be. So a lot of, some colleges, and particularly, some of the highly selective, the ones that everybody wants to know the numbers for, have actually announced that they are not purposely sharing their numbers, at least in this December timeframe. Usually the numbers tend to always come out by the springtime or definitely by the summer. But in past years, it would be like that hot, PR announcement of, Columbia's, admit rate is X, Y, and Z. And they're just not sharing that information early anymore. So that's kind of hard to get some of the information that we used to. But the other thing that I said to Terry is, if you look at these graphs or these bars, right? Yeah, some schools shift a little bit, year to year, but you generally are seeing the same height of the bar, for the college. So for example, and I'll just pull out, like Tulane, it's like 3/4 of the way across the chart. Tulane just always takes a lot of their students early, and so, whether they're taking 63% versus, 61% versus 59%. Yeah, that's going to vary year to year, but that they take a lot of students early, versus, some of the other schools here that, are just obviously hard to get into. Those are all the Ivies, but the same thing with Boston University or Boston College. You can see that their bar is kind of hovers around the same place. So, rushing to kind of know, did BU, did they accept 34% versus 31%? It's not going to make a difference, but that they take around a third of their class early. And you know what? And the other thing is, we truly, we can have a guesstimate in the direction that they're going. Like the likelihood is that Tulane is not going to drop to taking 20% of their class early decision next year. It's just not going to happen. So that. But do you need to know the exact number of what their early decision is like right now? Not necessarily. And by the time your student's really making their list, we'll have those numbers in the spring. But what the exact early decision number isn't going to make a difference whether your student wants to apply early decision there or not. There's a lot of other factors which relate nothing to the numbers. Obviously, you need to make sure it's the right fit. You need to make sure financially you're going to feel comfortable paying for it. And then, again, I'm just pointing out Tulane because they happen to have such a extreme. If your student is very interested in Tulane and you see that that is their propensity, that they do accept a lot of their students early, that if that's an important school to your student, then you need to consider that.
All right. So then we'll switch a little bit to another way of looking at some of the schools is the percent of the class that was admitted ED. So the last slide we showed was the admit rate for people who applied ED. And what this slide is showing is how much of the class, how many seats in the class are being filled through early decision. And so you can see with Tulane, as Debbie was just describing, not only do they admit about 2/3 of the students, or about 60%, I guess, of the students who apply, but they fill over 2/3 of their class typically through that early deadline. Bates College, much smaller than Tulane, and residential and liberal arts, fills 65% of its class through early decision. Emory, more similar in size to Tulane, 68%. And even places that many people think of as among, and they are among the most highly popular and selective, Williams and Amherst are filling over 40% of their class through early, and Dartmouth more than half the class. So when you realize that it's not simply, it's definitely not first come, first serve when you think about early, but you are competing for a space in a class that's 100% empty. And once you're in regular decision, if you're applying to Williams, you're competing for a space in a class that only has 56% of its seats left. And so that's one of the ways in which you can think about that early process.
So, and then the other thing, and somebody kind of asked about this, like, is there an advantage to, applying early? I mean, there possibly could be because, as we're pointing out, there are, it's the combination of how many applications the college is going to get and how many spots they're willing to accept in early. And I mean, I don't have the numbers to compare, but my guess is that, yes, there's an advantage to a college that is accepting or filling up, over half their class early decision. What that means is that the number of spots that are left for regular decision is much smaller, and they tend to get more applications in regular decision. So it is more competitive to get in regular decisions for a school that's going to accept such a large percentage of their class early. And a lot of times you will see like an overall admit rate, which, and I don't know Tulane's offhand, but basically the overall admit rate, right, is the combination of the early decision admit rate and the regular. But when you break them apart, you will in some schools definitely see that that early decision rate is much higher, and it's much more competitive for a regular decision. And it goes to the fact of what percentage of the class that they're accepting regular decision, early decision. So how many spots are left that are going to be more competitive. So this is where it is important to kind of go to the next level of data to understand if, and this is all related to if your student is applying, early decision at a school, to understand these numbers, because there might, when I say that your student might get an advantage, they still actually have to have the academic qualifications to get in, but they just are competing potentially against fewer other applicants, plus the school is taking more students during that stage. So that's the advantage that they're receiving.
I would just add to that, that early decision, from my perspective and my experience, can be a great option for families who can pay the full price without any concern. And it can be a great option for families who qualify for federal Pell Grants and are very low income. Because many of the colleges will meet the demonstrated need of those families, of those students at early decision time. It is a less appealing option often for families who will not qualify for federal or sometimes state aid, but who also can't comfortably pay the full price, because those are the families that typically want to be able to compare financial aid offers and merit scholarship offers from multiple colleges. And that's what you give up with early decision. You give up the opportunity to compare. One really helpful tool for many students and families is the net price calculator, which is a tool on college websites, federally mandated, where you can get an estimate based on your own situation of what your costs would be at that college. And I would really strongly suggest that families complete that net price calculator and feel comfortable with the result before committing to a college by applying early decision, because it really is important to understand the financing when you're making that early commitment.
So Terry, there's a question, and maybe this might be helpful if families don't really understand everything about early decision. Somebody's saying, is there an advantage to apply early but waiting to accept?
So with early decision, you don't have the chance to wait to accept. Usually your enrollment fee is due within a couple of weeks of your notification. So you may be notified around December 15th and have to pay your enrollment fee by the first week of January. With early action, you absolutely have the chance to wait until May and see what all your offers are. I would say there is not really an advantage to waiting, in that very few students who are admitted early action pay right away. Some do, especially if they've visited and they're confident it's their school of choice. Maybe they have a sibling who has attended. But many of them really want to, even if they feel like they know it's their first choice, they want to see what their offers are from other places. They want to go to an admitted student event in March. And so often they do not actually sign on the dotted line and pay their enrollment fee until late spring. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily an advantage to waiting for early action, and you don't have the option of waiting with early decision.
And Terry, there's one more good question maybe before we move on.
Yep.
Somebody's asking, if you apply early decision and are Pell eligible, are the schools likely to pick a full pay student over the student who needs aid?
That's a great question. And what I would say is, if they are interested in either or both students, they'll take them both. That's the beauty of early decision, is they have an empty class. And so they don't have to make those trade-offs in a way that they might have to in the spring, when they're really checking to see where they are in terms of their financial aid budget and that sort of thing. So at early decision, it is less true that students are kind of head to head with one another. What might be the case with early decision is that there are, if there are lots of wonderful early decision candidates who are all Pell eligible, they'd be more likely to be competing with one another for that early decision offer than they would be with the student who can pay the full amount. Again, that's one of the luxuries to the College of Early Decision is we have the opportunity to admit anyone who we want to admit early decision. All right, let me just move on and then we can take more questions. But we wanted to make sure that we summarize some of this. We know we've shown you lots of graphs and quite a lot of data, and you'll have the recording to be able to look at things in more detail or with longer time if you'd like. But important to know that the competition at highly selective colleges is going to remain very steep, even with the decline in the total number of high school students who are graduating. There will probably be some increased opportunity at less selective colleges because those schools will continue to want to enroll a robust class with as much talent as they can. And so that's an important thing to be considering, particularly for those of you with younger students. It is really important, I think, for students to understand that the reason the Common Application becomes available to them on August 1st is that we recognize that November is the new January and that lots of students will start their senior year with at least some of their applications filed, if not at least some of them begun. There's no reason they can't add additional applications if they learn of new places they're interested in. But senior year is a busy time. And so we see students wanting, even if they only apply to one school early action just to get an answer back, and maybe it's not at the top of their list, but it's a school they're really interested in. If they get that answer back and it's a positive answer in November or December, that can sometimes take some of the pressure off for the remainder of the year. Again, we talked about testing, and it's still really important, maybe has some increasing importance for students to take the ACT or SAT or both, and to make sure that they are staying on top of what that college's requirements are. Some of the colleges, most of the colleges that went test optional did also make test optional for scholarships, but not all of them did. And so I also could imagine that even those that remain test optional for admission might reintroduce the test requirement for some of their top scholarships. And then you want to understand again and remember that the public colleges are going to continue to be more competitive, and that it is also a matter of those colleges not being any longer kind of only looking in state for their students, but really looking across the country and frankly around the world for students. A couple other things about trends. You might have heard about direct admission. This is something that is done differently by different systems. Common Application, a company called Niche, and a company called Concourse operate some direct admission programs where basically based on students' objective criteria, they may be able to immediately know that they would be admitted to a particular college. And so that's something to keep an eye on. One of the things that I do sometimes when there's an issue that I'm interested in is I set a Google alert you could set a Google alert, for example, for direct admission. And then every time an article comes out about direct admission, you'd get a little alert about it, and you could read more about it if you chose to. I always encourage families to set Google alerts for the colleges that their children are seriously interested in, because it is a one way to help you stay up to date on what's happening. On the opposite end of direct admission is in some ways is colleges closing. There were 80 that closed in 2024. There will be more. I fear in 2025. I feel confident in 2025 there will be some additional schools that close. Some are merging with other colleges and are actually doing some pretty innovative things and making some good opportunities for students. But it's important, Debbie mentioned the common data set. That is a really good source of information. But again, if you can, keep your ear to the ground about the colleges that your child is most interested in as they develop that list, to make sure that there's the good health, financial health of the institution. Middle-class families, before I was remarking on the fact that early decision can be tough because you may not feel comfortable paying full price, but you may not qualify for significant gift aid. There are some colleges that are really working at making their institutions more affordable for middle-class families, and middle class is a kind of a amorphous term.
Yeah, it's hard to really define that.
But I would
on,
say
yeah.
there are colleges that are saying families with incomes of 250,000 or less. So this is not middle class of think of it being 80,000 or 60,000. There are some fairly high family incomes when you think about it nationwide that these colleges are understanding it still would be very difficult for families to pay the sticker price of these particular colleges. And then last, many of you are aware, I'm sure, of the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. What my colleagues have been talking about over this last year is that while they saw in some cases without being able to use race without being able to know race at the time they were going through the review process of applications, that in some cases they were admitting fewer students who ultimately they do get to learn after the fact how a student self-defines their race. There was not a significant impact of enrollment difference. And so I think this is a stay tuned issue in terms of, I think as time goes on, we may see some different patterns by race and ethnicity, but in the first year, there did not seem to be any significant changes in actually the composition of the classes, at least at private colleges. I have less information about how that, what the impact was at some of the public universities.
And the other thing you told me, Terry, which I kind of didn't put all the pieces together, was that the Supreme Court ruling was just about how colleges make the decision for admission.
Right.
It wasn't related to how they might recruit students or other incentives that they might use
Right.
to yield students. And so that's where colleges might be using other tactics to to get the mix of students that they want.
Absolutely. And it is a limited decision, limited in scope, in that it is only about, you cannot use race or ethnicity in the admission decision, but where and how you recruit and to whom you award scholarships is something that is within the institution's purview. I think this slide is probably in some ways one of the most important. Maybe print out this slide when you get the recording, or you copy it out a piece of paper and you hang it on the wall. But it is really about focusing on what's in your control. And then I think certainly Road to College provides lots of opportunities through webinars such as this one, but other services that they can provide to your family to assist you as you go through this. But it is wasted energy to be frustrated about what's not in your control, and really a good investment of your energy to focus on the things that you can control in this process.
Okay. And then Terry, if you can go just to the next slide. Or maybe you don't have it. Do you not have it?
This is
Oh.
the,
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted, we actually, we have a program that's kind of similar to what we're gonna answer some of the questions, but I just wanted to let people know we have a program that's similar to what we offer tonight, where we do monthly webinars, similar to tonight, where we talk about the topics that are important for families to educate themselves on. I mean, to tell you the truth, before this session, if you were a divorced family, we had a session about, FAFSA and financial aid forms, and how you handle it if you're divorced. And you'll get an email if you're interested. You know, our goal is always really to educate families as much as possible. If you can walk away with our information and kind of manage this process on your own, great. A lot of times family wants, oh, Terry, that's an old one. Don't worry about it.
oh, okay. I was hoping that was the right one.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We offer what we call a membership, which gives you these monthly sessions to learn, to ask questions. You have access to other experts to ask questions on the financial aid process, how to write essays, filling out the Common App, as well as access to a college search tool that we have created, which includes most of the common data set information that you would want to be researching. We just make it easier for you. So you will get information. We kind of Terry asked me actually before we got on, like, when do most people, kind of reach out to Road to College? When do they want help? And I said, kind of throughout the year, but we try our best to encourage people to kind of reach out as early as possible, because the earlier you understand the process, the better outcomes you will have. We've seen it over and over again, that when you understand kind of where your student and where your family kind of fits in kind of this process, when you understand what types of colleges from a financial standpoint you need to be researching, and what colleges are going to maybe offer your student the most money. And if you learn that early on, you just have more time to research, more time for your student to visit or understand different schools, so that the goal is honestly that you have a good list by the summer, and then your student can start focusing on kind of the execution of what needs to happen, which is writing the essays and doing, filling out the Common App. And you just don't want, if parents and families rush it, but it's just not a pleasant time. So, anyhow, you'll get more information on that. But let me jump to some of the questions which are interesting. I don't know, Terry, if you have an opinion about this. Somebody said, with a lot of the schools going test optional in the past few years, do we feel that the kind of the data that schools share about their SAT and ACT scores, particularly like the medians and the different percentiles, has that become overinflated, since really only like the kids with the better scores are submitting them?
So what I would say is, yes, I think it has inflated that test score at most colleges. One of the things you might be surprised by, though, is that there are so many students who are not at schools with good counseling, or don't have parental resources that can advise them, that there are many students who submit test scores where it's not helpful to their application. You'd be surprised that it's not only the ones at the top. At the same time, because colleges know that test score averages or medians are something that some families look at to judge a quality of the students coming in, they're self-interested in wanting those test scores to be as high as possible. My advice always is that if a school gives you their mid 50%, which is typically how they report their 25th percentile and their 75th percentile, students should feel very comfortable submitting if they're in that top quartile, and less comfortable submitting if they're below the top quartile.
somebody asked this early on, and you explained a little bit about direct admissions, but I mean they asked if the data that we were showing included applications that were from direct admissions. And to tell you the truth, I don't know. I actually tried to find that information from some of the reports, and it wasn't broken out. So I don't know if if the Common App just isn't reporting that yet, if that is included. It's a good question.
It is a good question, and my guess is that it is including the direct admission from some of the schools. So, for example, a Common Applications direct admission program allows a college to select certain states and a certain GPA. And what we say is, if you are a student who applies with this GPA, number one, you don't have to write the essay. And number two, you will be admitted. And there's still some fine print in terms of the curriculum that you've taken and the sense of character and that sort of thing. But those students are filing a common application. And they're still filing it. We're still reviewing it. Really, the only direct admissions piece of it is that the student has some assurance ahead of time that they're going to get a positive letter, not a negative letter. So I expect those are considered in those counts. For students who may be doing direct admission through another platform, I don't know whether those would be considered. I think if a common application is ever filed as part of it, it would be counted in the common application statistics that are being reported.
And are you familiar, Terry, if the direct admission program also includes international students? Are they sending direct admit to international?
Concourse, particularly Concourse started
because they started internationally, yeah.
Right. And so Concourse is definitely one of the ones. I know that as I mentioned, I'm working with Hendrix College right now. When we signed on with Common App's direct admission program, we were not given the opportunity to choose international students. We only had US states to choose among. But Concourse, for a number of years, has been doing a direct admissions program specifically for international students at American colleges.
So there's a question here, and I don't know if you can have any thoughts. Somebody's asking, what indicators should they look for if a school might be potentially moving towards closing? Like, what would be red flags?
This is certainly an important question, and it's also something that I think is hard to necessarily stay aware of, particularly if you're not living in the region where the college is based, right? And so what I would say is, if a college has eliminated majors, dropped sports teams, reduced the size of the faculty, if they haven't built a new building or renovated a facility within the last couple of years, those would all be indicators to ask more questions. It is certainly not every college is building a new building every year, but most colleges have buildings that every college has buildings that only have a finite life, and so renovations become necessary over time. Many colleges have expanded their majors. Data analytics was not a very common major 10 years ago. Cybersecurity was not a common major 10 years ago. Those are now becoming much, much more common. So there are lots of schools that are expanding their academic opportunities, and there are quite a number of schools that are expanding athletic programs. And so you really want to see, is there a sense of expansion or a sense of contraction? But again, I think that I know it may sound really silly, but if you do Google alerts for the colleges that you're thinking about, you should get regular news articles, things that are not directed at high school students or their parents, but that are just in the news. And that can be helpful in knowing kind of what's going on in that community.
So I'm going to shift. There were a lot of questions related to early decision and merit scholarships. So if a student applies early decision, will they still get the same amount of merit as if they were to apply regular decision? Do you have any thoughts or insights about that?
My sense of things, having worked at quite a number of places that have early decision and have merit scholarships, is that most places will be treat equitably for merit scholarship students, regardless of which decision plan they apply under. Not all of them will. There are some that actually have an early decision grant, and you can gain more money through early decision. There are others that, because they know they're locking a student in under early decision, will in fact not give them as much merit scholarship as they would for regular decision. So if I was going to put a kind of rough percentage on it, probably 60% are equitable and maybe 20% it's better to be early and 20% it's worse to be early. And that's very rough numbers. But it's an important question to ask. How do your policies for merit scholarship differ for early decision versus regular decision? Because schools, again, particularly those that award additional money for early decision, are going to be quick to tell you that. If there's hemming and hawing, you might want to be a little more persistent in your inquiry.
So
I'm not aware of scholarships for early action, which just came up, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just something I'm not aware of.
I mean, I haven't either seen like where they say apply early action and we'll give you a scholarship, but I have seen some colleges offer merit to students who apply early action because, quite honestly, they are hoping that maybe that will kind of move the student's decision to say, okay, I'll just go here.
Yeah.
It's really honestly hard. There isn't like a black and white, like, the schools all do it this way or they don't do it that way, because every school kind of uses these factors. It's kind of like they're figuring out what their strategy is and what's going to work for their population of students. So they kind of all use it slightly differently. Just a quick question: is it better to apply using the common application or the university specific application?
So colleges pay to be part of the common application, and we also are required to have everyone who's on our staff sign a statement that says we will treat the common application equally to institutional. Many colleges have moved away from offering an institutional application because the common application is just such a great tool for so many reasons. Particularly, it's great for the school counselors and teachers. It's a really convenient way for the documentation that supports your student to come in through the Common App. I think it doesn't matter which form they use. It's about how well they answer the questions and how thoughtful they are in completing the documentation. You could certainly ask that at different schools, but I would be surprised.
I haven't myself heard of one school that says we prefer this over the other. If they're on the Common App and they have their own, I don't think that they have a preference. There's like a few schools that aren't on the Common App and only have their own application. There you obviously only don't have a choice. You know what, Terry, I have to admit, I wasn't completely listening to your question because I was writing an answer, but there seems to be people want clarity. You were answering about the test scores and about what does the top quartile mean?
Sure. So for many years, colleges reported the average test scores of their admitted students or their enrolling students. Sometimes they reported the median. Probably 30 years ago, there was a movement to instead ask colleges to provide a range of test scores. And so we were asked to provide a range that is referred to commonly as the middle 50%. which is, if you put all the scores in order and you went to cut it off at the top 25% and you went all the way down to 75%, what would that score range be? So perhaps for a particular school, that middle 50% on an SAT is an 1150 to a 1230. At another school, maybe it's a 1300 to a 1470. At yet another school, it might be a 900 to an 1120. And so the notion was to give you that sense of the middle 50%, because often certainly an average can be misleading and a median seems limited. And the other important thing is that most colleges, if they're giving you their admitted score range, that is typically going to be higher than their enrolled score range. But what your son or daughter wants is the admitted range, because that's the group of students they're competing within, not with the ones who actually ultimately enroll, not with that subset only of those who enroll. And so that's where I had said, I'll use the example again of, say, the middle 50 range is 1120 to 1260. I would encourage students who had a 1260 or higher to submit their scores.
There's a good question, which we didn't really talk about the difference between ED1 and ED2, but somebody's asking about if their student's not a recruited athlete and not a legacy, and maybe you can explain why they're asking that. Should they apply, or do they have a better chance or at ED2 versus ED1? Is one going to be a higher rate versus the other?
So early decision 1 and early decision 2 can often be confusing. And what I would say is that at most colleges, there's a larger ED1 population than there is ED2, because students who know they have a top choice often come to that decision in time to apply by a November 1st or November 15th deadline. What I've seen happen a lot with early decision 2, the groups of students who will sometimes fall into that category are students who don't do their visits until fall of senior year. So they didn't actually know what their first choice was by early November. That is often some fall athletes, because they're in season during the fall if they didn't do their visits before senior year. And then another group are the students who perhaps had a high school change somewhere in their 4 years. And so they want to make sure that first semester of senior year is going to be considered when they're reviewed for admission. They changed schools maybe at the beginning of 11th grade, or they have a trend in grades that they think it'll be great to show how well they're doing senior year. We always know, those of us who work at schools with ED1 and ED2 options, that a lot of the ED2 applicants are students for whom we are the second choice, where ED1 was not successful. And so they didn't get in ED1 to their school, so they then apply ED2 to their second choice. We still love them. We're thrilled that we're their second choice in many cases. There's no stigma to that. But I think for me, it's really about when the student comes to the decision of, this is by far my top choice school, the one I want to go to most, then they should apply ED1 if they know that in time. It's not going to be easier or more difficult ED1 versus ED2.
Okay, well, thank you, Terry. I thought this was great information. Hopefully everybody who came tonight walked away with something that's useful for them as they're starting this process with their junior or maybe even sophomore. You know, reach out with questions throughout the year. If you kind of want to be part of these types of conversations monthly, then look at the email that we're sending and consider joining the membership that we have. And again, to encourage people to start early, we are providing a really good deal of discounting our membership and actually including if you start now, it includes through the end of senior year, through June of senior year. So just consider that as like a nice backup plan of having good information and a good resource when you need it, plus good statistics and just access to people who have been through this multiple times and can steer you in the right direction and answer your questions. So thank you, Terry, and we will be sending the link tomorrow. And take care, everyone. Hopefully this is a good start for all the juniors who came tonight. Okay, good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.